Okay, welcome back to another episode of Homeland Security Off the Record. As always, please hit that subscribe button, the notification bell, so you'll be notified of all future shows. As I always say, my guests have long bios, and they're all in the description below, so you can read everything about them. Um, with that, James, Dr. Phelps, repeat what you just said. That's kind of a
Okay.
good segue into this whole thing.
You know, the historians of the future are going to look back on this period of time and say that this was a third world war because of the amount of expanse and impact it has had around the world. And this is definitely not a Russia-Ukraine conflict. It involves pretty much all of Europe at this point. When you deal with the food interdictions, the rest of the world, on top of that, the cyber conflict is way beyond the boundaries of Europe itself.
Mm-hmm.
Sargis, what do you think?
No, I agree. I mean, our communication pieces will be effective, very much degraded over the next couple of years. We're already starting to see some things nationally now. Imagine, like everything from Sri Lanka to Taiwan to Thailand to what is happening in Europe with the energy crisis, Baghdad, going into even South Sudan, China trying to expand into the former Republic of Congo, just the elections in Kenya recently, out of Nigeria, Boko Haram. You name it, and internal issues are caused now because of the whole energy sector sanctions. Whether or not even sanctions are going to be something that we could work on in the future years, since everybody's trying to not get off the U.S. modeling and find their own way to protect their own assets using whether it be different precious metals or different type of currencies. So, let's not talk about what's coming through the southern border. So it's across the board. It's affected everybody, to include an individual in your own town. I told a Syrian army commander who came initially saw me in 2014, who wanted advice to help his multi-force structures, and I put a piece of paper in front of him. It was a picture of a gentleman who was a Kurdish gentleman who was captured by the Ottoman Empire soldiers in World War One. And I said, "Do you know who this guy is?" He said, "I don't know." I said, "This guy is related to the folks that are tied to the chemical weapons coming from Libya into Syria after what happened in Libya." And I said, "Do you know what happened in October of 2014 with Japan and Bank of Japan?" He said, "I don't know." I said, "The Bank of Japan bought a lot of our debt, which put us in a bad position of where we are today, of what we can do to counter maybe the Russians in Syria, and also what China may do to pressure into Taiwan and against Japan." And he said, "What does that have to do with my village that I'm trying to protect right now with our guys fighting against ISIS, maneuvering against them?" I said, "If you don't know any about this and how these are related, you're not going to be able to protect your village and those guys on the ground in your little, area in Bakufa or
Yeah.
Bartella." So I agree with it.
Yeah. And
James, go ahead.
I was catching up on some of my news. I took 5 days off and visited family, and was in a real remote location. So access to news and internet and stuff like that was extremely limited. It was very hard for me to stay to date on things. And so as I was going through 245 emails this morning,
Sounds like me every
to
day.
catch,
All of us
yeah,
have
yeah,
to.
just to catch up. you know, we the Taiwanese shot down a Chinese drone, yeah, that was in their airspace, which is an escalation beyond just going back and forth across the Taiwan Strait center line and into conflicted airspace. They shot down a Chinese drone, and that is a major escalation for them on top of everything else that's going on. Also, for the first time in 4 months, There are no carriers at sea, aircraft carriers at sea in the Pacific. None. We have none. All of them have gone back to their home ports and are in port right now in the Pacific side of it. So all of that pressure on China that was in conjunction with the Nancy Pelosi and other members of the House of Representatives visits to Taipei and so on, it's all gone. All of that defensive action that was in the area has now been pulled back into port. It's just not there. And it's the kind of thing where, gee, it's going to take a week or more for any aircraft carrier or carrier battle group to even get out into that region, even the one that's in Japan. There's one in the Mediterranean, and the Adriatic Sea has been there for quite a while. Sort of, if you don't know where the Adriatic Sea is, if you know where Greece is located in the northeastern Mediterranean, and you know where Italy is, it's between those two countries, but all the way up high. So it has an impact and a overflight ability or monitoring ability over what's going on at the northwest end of the Black Sea and in the Ukraine, Belarus, Romanian area. That carrier is about to be swapped out with another one that's en route to relieve it. That is, you know, when you think about America's projection of power into the world, we have gone from big projection of power to nothing out there.
One OSS veteran said when he was referring to Wild Bill Donovan, he said, I
sailed the Adriatic with a movie star at the helm.
Which I thought was perfect.
Good description.
Yes, it is. Now, with respect to China, I'm still kind of the conclusion that China is imploding still, and I don't know. And I'm going to ask you your opinions. Do you think China can afford now to even try to invade or take over Taiwan, given everything that's imploding internally? They've got so many problems internally that they're trying to deal with. Their GDP is down, I think, for the third quarter. Infrastructure is down. Factories have closed. Some are working only part-time. They've got some real serious problems. I mean, can they afford to take, to think that they can take advantage of the situation right now with America and NATO in the greatest conflict we've been in since World War II, which I think basically is World War III. It's Western democracy and liberty and freedom versus totalitarian and autocracy. And I don't know whether China is willing to take advantage of that situation. I think they've been surprised at the coalescing of the West, and particularly NATO and the U.S. Coming together to aid Ukraine, supply them with as much weaponry and logistics and intelligence as they have, and as of now, have really pretty much got Russia on its heels, which James, you and I had talked about earlier. Could, if Putin gets pushed into a corner, we talked about the possibility of his going for the nuclear option, which is in their military doctrine. I think you alluded to what you thought might happen would be it would be a rogue. I mean, it would be a captain of the ship in the Black Sea who was getting hit by American-made harpoons, who just says, "Hey, screw it, I'm not dealing with this." But what do you think? Getting back to China, can they afford to do anything, or are they just saber rattling?
Well, as you know, China's been saber rattling for years and years now, just like Russia, just like Putin, since around 2001, 2002. He has been threatening the West over encroachment along his border with NATO, and he finally stepped out and said, "We warned you, we warned you, we warned you, we warned you. I'm going to act." And all of a sudden, everybody said, "Wait a second, he's acting," right? China's the same way. President Xi has been there for almost 20 years now, and he is in the same position. We warned you, we warned you, we warned you, we warned you. You just instituted massive provocation against us, and it's the point where people, from a stress perspective, take action, particularly when there's big domestic issues at home, when there's issues with employment and lockdowns and food supplies and distributions and that type of stuff. What ultimately happens is, what's the best way to distract your home population from what's bothering it? I mean, all three of us know the answer to that, because it's historically it's the answer. And there's the big threat that China will send a portion of its army and air force to assist the Russians, which was something that was recently proposed just as recently as last week, to assist the Russians with the Ukraine conflict right now. I don't know whether to call it a conflict, a war, or a military action, or what, but it's technically a war. So we've seen this happen before amongst like-minded groups of politicians around the world. Remember the Franco Revolution in Spain, which resulted in Spain being neutral during World War II. Where did the Germans test all of their aircraft and all of their bombing and all of their tactics for aerial support of ground troops? It was all tested right there in an active war in a neighboring country, just because it was available. China wants to know how their equipment's going to stand up against the West. They don't have to keep the standoff with Taiwan going. All they've got to do is send a handful, maybe 50,000 different troops, 100,000 troops with aircraft and support equipment and everything else. Send them to Ukraine. Right up. They will get a direct interaction with Western weapons and have a really good idea of what's going to happen if and when they come into confrontation directly with the Taiwanese and perhaps some of the countries that might step in and support Taiwan. Unlike the Ukraine, the Taiwanese have no land borders. If you put an embargo on that country, it's going to be very much like our very successful embargo on Cuba was back under the Castro era. You won't be able to get anything in and out of that country.
You mentioned that China has been talking about sending troops and other technologies to help Russia, because Russia, they're scraping the bottom of the barrel. Trying to find troops. Their attrition rate is horrific, and they're scouring prisons and letting criminals. They're sending everybody they can into the fight. If Chinese troops get involved, are they going to come face to face with? Is that going to lead to a NATO, U.S. confrontation with Chinese troops and their technology? As you said, if China is wanting to try to test their technology, I know that the U.S. is certainly being able to use the situation in Ukraine to test a lot of our weapon systems and strategies, like our multi-domain awareness or integrated multi-domain awareness, from all the services. We're testing a lot of our strategies and tactics that have been put in place over the last couple of decades, including the technology, which has, I think, worked very well with regards to intelligence and weapon systems that we've supplied. But what happens if China does send troops? They are not battle tested. They've never experienced. They've never been in battle. And that little skirmish they had with the Indians, India at the outset pretty much kicked their ass.
And you got to remember, the last time they were in any type of a large conflict, it was with the Vietnamese.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and the Vietnamese kicked
The
their ass.
Vietnamese is a pretty good number on them too. So
Yeah.
Yes, they did.
But that only lasted until the Vietnamese ran out of ammunition.
Mm-hmm.
And then the Chinese got everything they want, because China has so many people and such a manufacturing capability that you just got to run the other guy out of ammunition or out of bodies that you can throw at the front line. That's it. And you suddenly still have ammunition, still have weapons, still have bodies. The Russians did this in the Second World War. They would send people, a long line of people, a squad, maybe 8-10 people. The first one had a rifle. The second one had a clip of ammunition. The third one had a clip of ammunition. And then the fourth one was supposed to pick up any leftover ammunition as they were being shot by the Germans in line, right? The Chinese have a history of doing that. They don't care if they lose 1 million people. 1 million people in China is only 0.1% of the population. To them, on a statistical basis, it's a meaningless number, right? We have to get out of the mindset. Oh, gee, Russia's lost an estimated 70,000 soldiers, according to the report today. Estimated by who? Who has calculated that? That's coming from Ukrainian intel reports feeding back to our system, which then does calculations based on the theoretical scenarios that we have proposed and run before. And it's always a high number. It never is an actual, we've actually lost this many people. You got to look at it from that perspective. But when you get involved with a country with a population the size of China, or a population the size of India, losing 1 million people is nothing to them. Nothing at all to them. They have that many. They have probably 10 times that many die every year just from disease. So it's not a measurable outcome.
Millions that die.
Yeah. So think about that. You have if the Chinese do send troops and the Chinese do send equipment over, you got to remember, it's a long way. It takes 2 weeks or longer just to get that stuff to Russia's border with Ukraine. Okay. If they keep their troops and their equipment and their manpower inside the borders of Russia, inside the borders of Ukraine and Belarus and perhaps the Black Sea area, guess what? NATO has no reason to get involved. NATO has no justification to get involved. And NATO won't get involved. So, and it will give them a direct conflict with, a direct interaction with, how do our aircraft perform against the surface-to-air weapons, air defense systems that we have provided to the Ukrainians. We've given them quite a bit of stuff, us and all of the other NATO countries in Europe. We already know the S-300 Russian system's highly effective against Soviet-style aircraft, right? We know that HIMARS has been a huge impact on the battlefield.
It's been devastating.
We know that the 155 howitzers that we sent over there have been used so extensively, we're now drawing down U.S. reserve stocks of 155 ammunition to send it to the Ukrainians. They're using so much of it. So it's obviously effective.
And right now, the world markets, if you're looking at getting any of that stuff to them, to the Ukrainians, is pretty much bought up. And a lot of the countries that are buying it up are holding it. Some of the biggest buyers out there at the international level are, you're looking at the British that are purchasing it through their companies and holding it. If you go to Africa right now and you try to get that ammunition, they don't want to give it up. Literally, you go from Somali lines, contacts with distributors, to the Middle Easterners who control it for the flow that comes into Africa, to all the African nations. I mean, it's very difficult to be able to move any of that stuff. But you know where you can find them? You can find them from the Chinese. Now, if you're an American and you're trying to get that stuff through the Ukrainians, of course, you're not going to get approval with the ITAR requirement if you bring Chinese 155 rounds in. But the China is now underbidding most of the contracts of those billions that we have given to the Ukrainians with the support of some Westerners and some expatriates who are now working for some Chinese company and are literally building their own capacity internal to China with our US dollars, and the European and NATO dollars are being executed in Ukraine, which really it's building that capacity. We're funding the build of capacity for the Chinese Communist Party for their military capability on the issues that we may have to engage them on the battlefield, or even our allies may have to fight against them. So it's ridiculous the way it works, but unfortunately, you know, when you're looking at authorities, regulations, what legislation Congress is looking at, it has made it very difficult. And I will tell you that you go sit with our defense contractors today in the United States, they'll tell you on the first slide, show me how you're going to make money for China. If you want us to get involved, it is sad reality, but it's the truth, and it's unfortunate. Look, we kind of knew this was coming. In 2015, I was in February in Japan. I went there to brief them about a ISIS cell that was operating in Japan itself. That opened up the door for me to have a briefing with their Ministry of Interior. I could talk about it because of the fact I don't have a non-disclosure statement with them from the Near East, being a private think tank LLC. But I told them then in 2015, and I told them my recommendation is see if Abe at that time, who was recently assassinated, if Japan has the capability to modernize the Chinese military force structures. If they do, if I was Abe, my recommendation to them was I would fly in, not in secret, and total openness into China. I would say that I will help you build your capacity for your military to modernize it. If the Chinese said, yes, you got them. If they said no, you still got them, because now you have finally flushed out what their true intentions were. And as I tell people all the time, I've told people in the past, if a guy says I'm going to kill you, and then he cocks back a gun and punches it at your head, you might want to take him seriously. I don't know why, for whatever reason, in the past we used to take those people seriously and we used to be engaged to try to fight them. Today, current administrations, they just basically let it flow off until they have to react to something. I think the problem we are going to have today still, Russia is able to bypass sanctions. China, the lead of the SCO, is able to have folks everywhere at once. When the Iranians were in Baghdad just a couple of days ago, you had Chinese PLA advisors with them. That's not good. This is not a good thing for us. When the port in Lebanon exploded, those were Chinese designed missiles that were in those particular plants when those so-called fertilizer blew up. Look, as long as you have American politicians and American legislators and American businessmen willing to do whatever they can to keep Chinese Communist Party leadership afloat, we are going to have a hard time defeating him. We could pull the tooth of the dragon. We may not be able to kill it, but we need to be able to first get those people internally in our country that are working directly for them, not with them, but for them, and sweep them out if we are going to do anything when it comes to China's expansion. And as it was mentioned by James, they'll use every one of their people as a bullet. I think I was on the show a year ago when I said we had an executive in Missouri who found out that there was a Chinese Communist Party plan within her company that was stealing intellectual property. She busted them out. Doorbell rang at her door. She opens it up. The gentleman was delivering pizza. She said, I didn't order pizza. The individual that was under investigation, came through the bushes, put a round through her head, and then was found where he had taken his own life in a hotel room. That is how the Chinese Communist Party can control the global capability if it wants to. It will use every single one of its people as an operator for its wants and desires, to include killing executives that might want to go against it, even in the heartland of American Missouri.
The sheer number of not only Chinese nationals here, but the assets that they have recruited here, who they've caught, indicted, convicted, and sentenced, is in the dozens and dozens of dozens. And that does not include other nations like Russia. The numbers are just astonishing, because I don't believe that the public really understands just how extensive this is. And now they're using social media. They started using LinkedIn. They're using a fake LinkedIn headhunting accounts, and reaching out to people who you can find just about everybody you want that's in our space on LinkedIn.
On LinkedIn.
Tony, they hacked LinkedIn 9 years ago. There's no way LinkedIn is ever going to be able to protect itself. If you get that all the time, that's why I don't share that much personal information.
And then you add that to what they were able to glean from their hack into the Office of Management and Budget.
Oh.
And you have access to everybody's security clearances, their information. Then you can target. Then you can start targeting people that you want to go after as an asset.
It's so hard to differentiate between valid potential business contacts or academics and who might be working for some government, except that the Chinese ones are always exactly the same.
Yeah, they're easy to spot.
The photo is always of an extremely pretty young lady who apparently has her doctorate in some field associated with something that I might be interested in.
Yeah. I've been invited to agricultural conferences and bioethics conferences. In fact, the FBI's National Security Division has produced a number of very excellent videos talking about these very issues, and how to avoid them, and what to look for, and what to do in response. And they haven't really made them public in the way that you would think. It's been sort of a covert, overt operation to let the Chinese know, hey, this is what we're up to. This is what we're doing. We know what you're doing, and we're actually catching a lot of you guys. So it's more, I can read between the lines of how they work. It's more directed towards them than it is trying to inform the American population, because those in our industry are already aware of what they need to know and what's happening.
The problem is, Tony, it's we might be aware of it, but there's a lot of the companies that we have in the United States, to include the ones that are tied to chip technology production. A lot of them, their family member structures are tied to what was a historical Green Gang that ties back to the Chinese Communist Party. And you'll have two competing companies that are competing against each other. But when you look at the structures of the leadership, they're actually from the same family line. On the surface, they're American registered. You see them as competing against each other, but you see them as being stable, to where you have Congress saying that we need to have them, be the lead for the next chip design capability for the United States. And guess what? They're all tied back to the Chinese Communist Party because of the money that they're trying to make through China itself, or through Taiwan, I should say, for the Chinese leadership. These are the problems you're running into. Some of those individuals have family members, young men and women, who have gone ahead and joined the U.S. military academies. and our graduates and are currently in the U.S. military force structures. Now, we tried to go up to a future general in the U.S. military and say, hey, look, here's the documentation. Your dad, who is a very successful business person, here's his links to the Chinese Communist Party. You think that individual is going to be able to do anything against his own family members internally that are
Mhm.
tied that way? He's not going to do it. So their links have been expanding a little bit more. Look, the Russians have a better read, the ones that are operating in the U.S., on what the American perspective is on issues. And I think part of the struggle of the transformation they're doing internally to our nation of how American thinks and how they approach issues when it comes to just basic American security and American ideology is to make it simpler for them to be able to have controls, not to be able to allow us to function like we have in the past, to where you would have to have a Soviet plant here would have to read and understand our culture to be able to better maybe target us and be able to better manipulate us. The Chinese are not as sophisticated, the ones that operate here, but they do it without anybody really going after them. Even the PLA folks that were working out of the Houston consulate, even the current governor, who's a Republican, Houston, I mean, in
Mhm.
Texas, knew about it. What did you do about it? Not much.
Mhm.
Okay, so I mean, these are the problems we run into. If we are not going to go after these individuals, we're not going to really start getting rid of them. I mean, the back and forth between U.S. and Russia, with diplomats being sent home, with consuls being cut down, all that started under the Obama administration. Today, if you want to get a visa through the American consulate in Russia, I wouldn't be surprised if there's just two people stuck there, doing the paperwork. We don't have anything like that I've seen with our back and forth against the Chinese to be able to say, okay, you know what, that's it. Your consulate is going to be closed, just like we closed the consulate in San Francisco. We could close yours here and Washington D.C. Now go ahead and have your summit and see where Xi stands in October. We don't do that. And again, you say, can they afford to take the steps? You'll never have enough money or people, but you have opportunities, right? Right now, the opportunity is there for uh, China, when the seas are calm in October, to move into Taiwan. If it takes all the chip technology capability, what are we going to do? Where are you going to go get your screens from? Where are you going to get your new chip technology from? Your defense contractors today have the ability and knowledge to create new chips to basically knock off all the chips that are currently on the market, but they're not going to do it because if they do that, it might mean that they may have to cut into their own profit margins and actually have to burn their, companies that they're tied to in Taiwan. So we are where we are. A lot of the Chinese and the Indians, because they know how our system works, where most of them are working at, where are they mostly applying to? Foreign service. You have a lot of your foreign service officers are either Indian or Chinese descent. That's nothing wrong if you're an American and you
Mhm.
love the country, but they're not here putting their folks, encourage them to join our foreign service because foreign service is important. They understand you want to affect policy, you got to do it through the foreign service. And that's why you have so many of them currently getting into the foreign service, where we're starting to lose a footprint against how we look at China in the long run, or I should say, the Chinese Communist Party. Look, I think there's a generational gap that does exist. Truly believe that, I can only do what I can do while I'm alive. The second I'm gone, that's it. Somebody else has to pick up the reins. The concept of American patriotism and American ideals are passed on from parents to kids. Um, Now, is there a difference in how it's viewed by the next generations? Yeah, of course, there's a possibility, given the fact that we are much more of a broader, uh, uh, much more influences can come from outside that will say what your perspective was or your previous generation perspective was is not the perspective that we need to operate it under now. With that said, though, um, I think how it's institutionalized is the problem. If I could take all these American patriots, I put them in an institution that has now legally handcuffed itself and their ability to do what's for the betterment of the nation, it doesn't matter, right? What their viewpoint is. Institutionally, we have handcuffed ourselves. The international law really looks at state to state ability to function. We have a Iraq that is completely burning down. Instead of going down and linking at the lowest levels and saying, you know what, maybe we need to use these people, these tribal groups, to the benefit of a possible peaceful transition within the country to actually address the issues that were populating after Saddam, um, instead of trying to say, well, there's a government of Iraq. Most of the people that are in that government of Iraq that was established are criminals anyway. We wouldn't have them as being leaders in the West. Some with arrest records, I have to tell you, even in Europe, that we decide to make provincial leaders in Afghanistan. But the problem we had was the State Department would say, no, we have to work state to state. We cannot work at a tribal level. And what happens? A lot of the folks that we could have used and leveraged to help us, we marginalized. So we cut off our own hands. I think, again, you can take American patriots, put them in in an organization, but if that organization by authorities is hampered, you're going to get what you get, which is today.
We're losing our institutional knowledge and memory.
We've done that before.
Yeah.
It's a repetitive process. It's not something that's new. It's a repetitive process because we fail to, as Santayana said, we fail to learn the lessons of our own history. And the times we've done this before and what the outcomes are, we keep saying the same thing. This time, we won't make that mistake.
Yeah.
But we always do.
Yeah.
It's just the nature of the beast that you're dealing with, in both a political and an administrative capacity. It's there. It's going to happen. There's very little you can do about that other than to fix the pipeline that that educates those who move into that system. And right now the pipeline's broken too. Big time broken.
Yeah. The stovepipes still exist.
Oh yeah.
Everybody's still blowing smoke up their own pipe. And, that problem, which was a recommendation of the 9/11 Commission, as well as the little known report that came out before 9/11 that Randy Larson and Don Hamilton were on, which was a bipartisan congressionally mandated panel. L. Paul Bremer was the in charge of it. Their final report came out, I don't know, I think it was 6 months before 9/11. Nothing, not one recommendation was implemented. And even today, after the pandemic, there is not one after action report. There are no lessons learned that have been written or done anywhere.
Well, they exist. You can't get to them because they're behind paywalls, or the government doesn't want you to, the government agencies don't want you to know about them and have suppressed their publications. And I'm not a conspiracy theorist type of a guy. You guys know that. But, I invest in access to contrary opinions, that I can read or listen to, because it's important to
Yes.
understand the mold, the model that's going on today. You have to be able to access that stuff.
Yeah, we all still have our own individual
right,
proprietary and whatever intelligence streams that we get every day. And some of the reports that you're mentioning are in that. So they do exist, but they're just not they're not available to the public typically.
Tony, I'll make it very simple. I was asked by a friend of mine, said, well, look, doesn't the FBI, CIA, and all these DIA know about this particular issue? I said, yeah, they know about it. Says, why aren't they fixing it? I said, because if they fix it now, then the American people are going to ask, when did you know about this? And then they have to say, we knew about it, 10 years ago. They'll be like, well, why are you, why didn't you do anything about it?
Why didn't you fix it 10 years ago?
No, yeah. and then conversely, after it happens, their reaction is, well, why the hell didn't you do something about it?
Yes.
That's right. It's always the same.
And to protect the institution, they're not releasing it. Look, I'll make it much more personal. I was asked by my oldest son, my younger son was running around the yard, playing around, and he said, what would be the most disappointing thing you think for, his brother? And I said, the most disappointing thing for his brother would be the most disappointing thing for me. And he said, what would that be? I said, if he ever thought that his dad is something different than what he ever thought about him. And I said that would destroy him internally if he ever saw that maybe he's not the person or the man that he thinks he is. And institutions look at themselves that way. Their worry is that, oh my God, American people might actually think that, maybe the 3-letter agency guys are, we call them the Central Intelligence Agency. Sometime when we're in the Army on the ground, my first tour in Iraq, we used to call them the clowns in action. Maybe they would look at it from a different perspective and say, maybe this is not working. And then those institutions themselves don't know how to deal with the reality of what might be. They have tied themselves in such knots that they cannot even untangle themselves from some of the stupid that they execute, which for us becomes a foreign policy. Look, America has enough resources that can stumble across the planet, as I told a soldier of mine, like a drunken sailor, and then still be able to recover. Some countries don't have that ability. They make one mistake, it's done for them. The problem is America has invited all these other nations into the fold now to be decision makers. It has marginalized itself because of its political elites who want to do that. And the issue is now it doesn't know how to manage larger number than it was easier to manage 1 or 2 people. Today, if you want to deal with an issue in Baghdad, you have to go get the opinion of the Russians that you're fighting against in Ukraine. The Chinese Communist Party is trying to basically eat your lunch in your southern hemisphere. The Iranians, the Turks, the tribal guy on the ground, some cleric called Sadr. You didn't have to do that. You chose to do that. And you thought that if I bring more people to the table, I would be able to manage it easily. No, now you have to go get everybody's opinion and try to formulate a foreign policy. Oh, by the way, every 2 years you go through a damn election, and you may not be able to, your party may not be able to control the Senate or the House to give you an opportunity to push that foreign policy. We have taken a gut punch, and I don't know if we're recovering from it, to be honest, unless the Great Reset happens with the Chinese Communist Party deciding when we go after the American military. And then even the decision maker will be in a position where finally the generals can walk and say, sir, you have no choice. You have to do something about it. And unfortunately, we don't know how many of those are compromised based on their previous relationship with the Chinese Communist Party through businesses.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's going to happen.
I wanted to go back to something that James, that you had said about infiltration in the United States by foreign agents. I think the Chinese probably have been learning or can learn very well from the old KGB, now the FSB. Well, I wanted to ask your opinion, both of you, about the continuing existence of, may have been former, when they came here, KGB, certainly now FSB, sleepers, we call them, or illegals, some of them are still being rounded up, like the couple in Florida recently, which is, I've done a lot of research into that, and have talked to some people I know in the community, and that's a very interesting case, especially when you look at where he had previously been stationed in Alaska. Is the sleeper problem, the illegal problem, still a concern? You know, maybe a decade ago or more, you know, we had the, I call it the Anna Chapman ring that was rounded up. And interestingly enough, it doesn't matter what you think about Peter Strzok, but he was head of counterintelligence at the time, and he was responsible for overseeing that rolling up that group. But do they still present a problem? Because obviously they're still here because some are being caught.
Well, I think the Chinese, and Sargis will probably talk to this better than I can, is that the Chinese have learned a lot about inculcating themselves into the system, insinuating themselves into the administration, into leadership in government positions and in universities, and in controlling family members who are American citizens through relatives they have back in China and Taiwan and so on and so forth. That is a different model of intelligence gathering than the ones that are used or were used or still being used by Russian and Russian-aligned groups, or the Iranians and their groups, or even the Pakistani ISI types.
Mm-hmm.
That's a whole different perspective between the two. It's different types of gathering, of putting people in place to gather intel and then get it back to the government.
Over long periods of time.
That
was the Soviet model.
There's a change there. There's a difference there that the Chinese have learned from watching and learning from and studying what these other countries have done, and have fixed a lot of the discrepancies, the problems that are out there. This issue of this couple in Florida, I assume you're talking about the Navy guy who was trying to sell nuclear submarine secrets, him and his wife, to I believe who was it, the Russians?
He retired from a long career from the Coast Guard.
But that's not the first time.
Oh,
it's
no,
not the last time. The Russians are good at compromising individuals, but in almost every instance with military types or former military types, it's all been about money and selling information for money to them. And the approaches were made by the American military people, not the foreign government. Now, when it came to intelligence agency people, I'm sure you remember the Hansen case and some of the other ones out there.
Very well.
That was a different situation. That was where the foreign government got in and compromised, those people. And once they were compromised, they just continued the compromise process.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that process is different from the selling assets or information for money, the Walker family spy ring problem.
The John Walker spy ring. My good friend, Major General Oleg Kalugin ran.
Yeah. But that's different from what the Chinese are doing.
Yeah.
And it's a different perspective in intel gathering. and in how they go about doing it, and in how they get their fingers into the deep pockets, the deep databases and stuff. It was up to the Russians compromising people in America or having direct assets working in agencies that compromised us from way back at the Manhattan Project with the Rosenbergs and those folks. And it's been that way ever since then. However, the Chinese take people, make them work here, educate here, become part of the culture here. They turn around and are very intelligent. They get jobs at government facilities like Sandia Labs or
Mhm.
Los Alamos, and they walk out with a CD or a DVD with the most recent data on American thermonuclear devices. They literally walk out. Remember that?
Lawrence Livermore has
Yeah.
a huge database on all of our nuclear weapon systems.
And you print it to a disk and you're able to walk out because it's nothing electronic about the disk to set off any kind of metal detector or any kind of sensing unit whatsoever. You just walk out with it. And they did. There was the mock-up about 10 years ago, I guess it was, maybe 7 years ago. There were satellite photos of a mock-up of an F-35 fighter in a residential neighborhood of China, sitting in a parking lot.
Yeah.
We didn't even have photographs of the airplane.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And yet they're building mock-ups to design, the structures and all of that to figure out how it's functioning and working. And they're doing it in places that we wouldn't normally be looking at because, who thinks somebody's going to be doing that next to a garage building in some part of some city with 25 million people living in it in very tight confines? Nobody thinks of that. Chinese are smart enough to think of that. So it's a problem. I was just recently, and I'm glad I don't have a clearance anymore because I don't have any clearance anymore. Okay. I don't have to report any of my contacts to anybody, which is a good thing because the last time I had to report my foreign contacts to, a background investigator, it was 97 pages long with data. I mean, I couldn't fill it out. They couldn't even begin to do
What
it.
is that? SF3?
I don't remember anymore, but it was just a list of foreign contacts was that long.
Oh, yeah.
And they finally said, well, look, okay, how many of these people would you actually have some sort of a relationship with that, might involve money or family or something like that? And we narrowed it down to 10 people that they could screen me for.
Yeah, I remember those days. And I've forgotten more secrets than I ever knew, but I also signed, not even reading. I signed more NDAs than I can ever imagine.
And I was out having dinner in the international city component of Dubai at a new Chinese restaurant that had opened with a Chinese doctor who had invited me to come out for dinner. And the Chinese doctor had invited the cultural attaché of the Chinese consulate in Dubai to come sit down with us and have dinner. That attaché was pretty stupid. I mean, first off, they couldn't speak English in a country where English is the second language. And they didn't ask any questions to me about my background, my history, why I was over there teaching or anything like that at all. Nothing. Had they asked questions and found something out about me, I'll bet you I'd have had a whole lot of more paid for 5-star lunches and dinners down the road. But they didn't, because they were looking for other sources of information and other sources of intel. They weren't looking for somebody like me at that particular time, or maybe that particular Chinese lady wasn't that Chinese attaché wasn't.
Yeah.
You see, this is what they do. They're all over the place. They're in the Chinese cultural centers. They're in the Confucius centers. They're in
Yeah.
the Buddhist centers. They're in our businesses. They're in our national laboratories. They're in our national industries. They're in our agencies. And in many cases, they're dual citizens.
Yes.
And
Yes.
they're very vulnerable to the pressure you can apply on their limited numbers of family members.
Yep.
Excuse me, but that's a good way. You want data and you want it fast.
Yeah,
That's how
there
you
you go.
get somebody to get it for you.
I was in Kuwait, and the Kuwaiti government decided that we're going to build an ammunition factory right next to the two golf balls that we had, that all the signal intelligence information was tracking through. Who was building it? The Chinese. This is going back in 2009, 2010. And I couldn't get it in the heads of our leadership then to say, this is not good. You might want to try to do something about this. I was in Fort Lewis, Washington, when we're going back to 1995. And my friend took me out when we were doing the railheads for trying to go to NTC. And we're at the Puget Sound. And he said, "You see that area of Puget Sound over there?" He said, "That's bought out by Chinese." He said, "You see that other location? Bought out by Chinese." So the choke point where we have to send most of our military equipment, 1995, folks, it was Chinese purchase. I have a friend of mine who works in the food industry. A lot of people don't know. Cartel owns and runs most of your food industry. The whole open source piece on the avocado wars, okay?
Mhm.
The cartel's trying to get our avocados. Guess who's tied into them? The Chinese communists.
That's why they cost like $5 a piece now.
Well, I mean, the Chinese Communist Party is tied into them. And the Chinese Communist Party just a month ago were looking at 16 million metric tons of our beef that they're trying to purchase. That's 20% of U.S. production.
Mm-hmm.
And a friend of mine who works there says, "I don't feel comfortable with selling them." Well, guess what? Nobody in the U.S. systems was interested about dealing with it. The only people who might be able to deal with it, and a lot of people don't understand, sometimes they think, Foreign Service is just the State Department. No, actually, we have Foreign Service, is also the Department of Commerce and Department of Agriculture. You have folks from the Foreign Service in there. But what are they doing? Are they collecting intel? Are they formulating into some kind of a policy? America doesn't have a geostrategic policy to counter issues of famines just like China has.
Mhm.
For them, it's survival. It's hard to feed three meals a day for billions of people. So that in itself, is an issue that we never look at. Look, United States for the longest time under our leadership has not understood what the Chinese have done. I had a friend of mine who I asked him to come out of retirement. He was retired for 45 years. And I said, "You have to come out and help out," especially when we were involved with the force structures of what we were trying to do in Iraq. And he was when Kissinger had just come back from China. He was there. And he said, "I walked in and I saw the warehouse full of Chinamen sitting there and translating every single book that they could have gotten from the West. And they were translating it. We're talking about years. And I will tell you that he's a guy who will tell you today that they're well ahead of their 100-year plan and much more ahead of even their 50-year plan.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
And technology has now made it much more easier for them.
Our good friend Don Ulch, he has talked about this until he's blue in the face.
Tony, if you wanted to monitor all of the communications in the United States, all you have to do is go to any one of the communications, the international communication centers that we have up and down the West Coast or up and down the East Coast. I mean, I teach that in my classes. Is if you wanted to have the biggest single impact on the United States' economy and the world economy, what do you hit? And the students, oh, well, World Trade Center, do this, do that, blah, 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 blah. And then I have to point them in the right direction. And I say, no, every bit of that communication goes through which 3 buildings? And all you got to do is shut down one of those 3 buildings. Not all of them, just one of them. And then how do you go about doing it? You don't have to have trunk line access through a specially constructed subterranean feature in in Oklahoma, which, by the way, is important because one of the biggest fiber optic lines runs right through the AT&T switching center there. In the 1990s, they didn't even, when they put those trunk lines in for that fiber communication system, one of the things that one of our government agencies did is they literally built special rooms inside the switching centers that have very secure doors, that have code access that none of the employees could get into. There's no way to know what's in there, except that the fiber optic lines literally run right through a box. And they are, they are in a position to collect 100% of all of the fiber optic transmissions, and everything goes through those lines.
Exactly.
It's not just the one in Oklahoma that gets your attention. It's the fact that they do this on all of the trunk lines that cross the oceans. And they do this in a handful of places in the middle of nowhere, America, where these lines have to come together and have to meet and have to be connected. But if you want to take the systems down, you don't even have to go to these places to do it. All you have to do is go to any of the big, telecommunications infrastructure switching centers. They're huge. They're giant. The internet, being a worldwide means of communication and connectivity and interaction between people, a chance for us to talk to folks all over the world at any moment in time, get live video streams from any place, literally any place in the world. The internet is a tremendous asset to everybody. And it's a place where we can find just about anything and everything we want to know, and a lot of stuff we could really don't even want to know people think about. This is part of what we have to accept as fundamental to our economy, to our society, to our culture, is our access to the ability to communicate anywhere we want to, with anybody we want to, anytime we want to, in any language we want to. It's essential. It's part of what we do. The internet is something that has changed the world around us, and it's changed our world. Just think back to the time, well, you guys remember it, when there wasn't an internet, when there wasn't a Google, when there wasn't an Amazon, when there wasn't more than 3 telephone companies in America.
But Tony, you mentioned DARPA. This is where our problems are institutionally. I don't know if you all gentlemen know the dancing robot. It was created, U.S. created capacity. It was given literally
Boston Dynamics.
Right. It was given to DARPA. What did DARPA do? Turned around and gave it to the Koreans, which is a backdoor to the Chinese Communist Party.
They've also got it now mounted with a 50 caliber. I don't know if you've seen those videos.
Yeah, I mean, this is the problem. This is where we lose things. We give it to them through our institutions. Like, if I want to work on the metaverse right now, there's 2 laboratories I could go to. Really, I want to do truly good work metaverse-wise if I don't build it here, because capacity isn't. I go to South Korea or I go to Israel. If I build it in Israel, Israelis have the technology, but also they do work with some South Korean capabilities to include Samsung, which Don would tell you it's really compromised by the Chinese Communist Party as a backdoor without them even knowing. Okay. If I go to South Korea, I guarantee you tomorrow, whatever I develop with the metaverse is going to be sitting in the laps of the Chinese. I know a gentleman who had designed the flat panel technology for our F-35 Joint Strike Fighter. I know how they stole his information, his process. I'm the one who actually he came out and reached out to and was able to help him to get him to a point where he can maybe fight them legally. They even use the IRS to go after him to steal his whatever information that didn't have to include patents that he has to make sure that he can never develop it so that those patents become their patents in the long run. The issue we run into is that there's nothing that we can create in this country that we give our governmental institutions that is possibly not going to be compromised by our governmental institutions back to the Chinese Communist Party. They doing it directly for their gains or indirectly? Nobody cares. At the end of the day, as I used to tell people, you could argue over whether it's an Al Qaeda or is a ISIS K or is a ISIS itself or Taliban. If a guy puts a round through your head, you don't really care who the hell he put put the round through your head. You're dead. Uh, we need to be very cognitive. You're mentioning the communication issues. Next 2 years is going to be absolutely horrendous for us in communications. We're heading down that path. And, I've told my kids just a few days ago, learn to work without your iPhone because guess what? That day will come for you. It may
Yeah.
not be now. It may be in a year and a half, but it will come for you. There's nothing out there that we have designed for ourselves. We could do it. It's not difficult, but I think what's going to happen, you're going to end up having to go to war. And then once you have war, it will take at least a couple of years to be able to get our technology back up and running and producing it internally in the country.
Yeah.
By then, who knows where the heck we're going to be.
What happened in Baghdad? What have you heard lately about that?
The only reason that this civil war is on embers right now is because all the major players geostrategically who were fighting in Baghdad, to include the Chinese, the Russians, and the Americans, realized when the port of Qasr was at 50% production with the energy crisis that Europe is about to get absolutely hampered with, that we cannot allow this to happen. We're going to have to delay this fight for the future. So because of that, that's the only reason pressure was put on Saudi to calm it down. However, once blood is shed, guess what? It's going to be blood for blood. 19 years later, almost 4,000 contractors killed, similar plus numbers of American servicemen, almost 300,000 plus Iraqis killed. If you're looking at just the statistics that you're getting from UN side of the house and what we're reporting from the U.S. military side, still 19 years later, look at it. It's absolutely destroyed. They're killing each other. 10 months they haven't had a government.
Yeah.
So these are backyard wars. I had written a series of articles called Backyard Wars for Daily Herald. They actually called me, a local newspaper, and asked me if I could help write for them. And it was really, these are all the backyard wars that we're fighting. And unfortunately, for whatever reason, we have decided to cede a lot of these areas to the Chinese Communist parties. I had written an article in 2015 on in October of 2015 on new power relations, which was a term that was really introduced by Wang Yi when he spoke at the Brookings Institute. And then instead of Susan Rice countering it, she stood on stage in George Washington University, said, let's see how we can actualize it. That same reason is what's happening in Ukraine. The chess pieces are moving to establish what Wang Yi had initially proposed. And it was that America was going to have, as Obama stated it, a steady decline. And we were going to be internally focused. However, the only difference between Obama and President Trump was Obama decided to leave the Middle East and focus on South America. and internally to U.S., ceding Asia completely, regardless of how many people the Chinese Communist Party kills, to the Chinese Communist Party. And then, Trump said, no, I'm going to counter the Chinese Communist Party because we have to break it. I'm not going to allow it to be successful. So the reset was going to be in Europe. Either the EU was going to win or it was going to be the Russians. All those chess pieces are the same. And I just recently wrote an article, same thing, new power relations and the European conflict.
It is always an honor and a privilege to have you on. So, guys, thank you so much. Audience, another episode of Homeland Security Off the Record. Be sure to subscribe, hit that notification button, and like. And we have more shows coming up. Guys, thank you so much, and have a great day.
Will do. Outstanding. God bless.